Hey, good afternoon. This is Marvin Lindsay. I'm the pastor of First Presbyterian Church in Columbia, and I have a question for you. Are you missing Holy Communion? Is that the thing that you're really missing about worship? I think the number one thing that we're missing about not being able to worship together is seeing each other. But just listening to people talk and reading posts on social media, it seems like maybe the one thing that people are missing the most is the ability to take Holy Communion in a pandemic. And so if you are, this is what I want to say. And what I want to say is first to tell a story that speaks to me. It's a story from the Bible. And in the Old Testament, there's a guy named Elijah. He's a prophet. And he basically was a guy who spoke truth to power. And he got in trouble for it. The queen decided to put a contract out in his life. And so he ran away. He ran away and he ran out into the desert all by himself. And out in the middle of the desert all by himself, he was met by an angel. And there was with the angel a bunch of freshly baked bread. And the angel said, I think Elijah was asleep. I can't quite remember all the details of the story. But anyway, Elijah said to Elijah, get up and eat. Get up and eat, because if you don't eat, the journey is going to be too far for you. It's going to be too hard for you. And so the scripture says Elijah got up and ate. And on the strength of that bread, he made a 40-day journey all the way to Mount Sinai, out in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula, where God met Moses many centuries before and gave Moses the 10 Commandments. And I'm telling you this story because this passage of Scripture really spoke to me at a particular point in my life. I read it as part of my daily devotion one morning, a few days before the congregation that I served was scheduled to have Holy Communion. And I got a really powerful sense from reading that scripture that this communion was going to be important to me, because I was getting ready to go through a difficult period of time, and I really needed the grace that God would give me in this upcoming sacrament, and that grace would sustain me in a difficult time. And it turned out that that's pretty much the way it worked out. It was a very difficult time that I went through in that month or so after that Holy Communion experience. But I emerged on the other side of it okay, relatively unscathed, a little bit wiser, and I think spiritually in a better place with God than I was when I went into it. So this is what I want to invite you to do right now as I come to this stoplight. I want you to remember the last time that you had Holy Communion. Can you remember it? Can you remember the last time you had Holy Communion? Okay. Where were you? If you remember First Presbyterian Church, were you in the Ramsey Center? Did you come forward to dip the bread into the cup? Or were you in the sanctuary, and did you have the bread and the cup served to you in the pew? Were you looking at the mosaic? Were you looking at a video on the projection screen? Or Preston Turley playing the guitar? Or if you're not a member of First Presbyterian, or you took Holy Communion someplace else, what do you remember about that experience? Do you remember the people around you? Do you remember any music associated with it? That communion was sufficient for you. The grace that God gave you in that moment is sufficient for you now, in this moment, when we cannot come together and worship, when we don't know how we're going to pay the bills because we lost our job, when we don't know how we're going to educate our kids because the schools are closed, when we don't know how we're going to make it through another boring day because we can't play bridge with our friends, can't have the grandkids over for dinner. when we don't know what's going to happen to our sick relatives, when we don't know what's going to happen to us if we get sick. The grace that God gave you in that last Holy Communion you had was sufficient for this long journey that you are making right now. This journey that you are making through a wilderness of pandemic and economic disaster, a wilderness where there are no real guideposts to show us the way. So we have to pray to God every day for God to show us the way. The grace you received is sufficient. And what happened to Elijah was that he did make it to Mount Sinai, and God spoke to him there. And God sent him right back where he'd come from. So sometimes if you're running from something, sometimes God meets you only to send you right back into that situation you were running away from. But the other thing is, it's so powerful and symbolic for Christians that God met Elijah at Mount Sinai, where centuries before, God had given Moses the 10 Commandments. The commandments that show us how... Got to hold on to the phone here as I turn into Rockwell Heights. The commandments that show us how to love God and show us how to love our neighbors as ourselves. That's what all of those thou shalt nots are about. It's really about getting to love, not what you can't do. It's about that you get to love people and you get to love God. And so this is what I want to say to you as well. We are going to be a more obedient people on the far side of this pandemic than we were going in. We are going to see God somewhere along this journey and hear God's voice in a way that we have not heard before. And God has already given us the grace in the communion that we last took, whether it was in February or March or in August of last year. We have the grace that God has given us, and that grace will get us through these days. So take care, be courageous, and just one step in front of the other, and trust that at the end of this journey, God is waiting for us to speak to us and to inspire us with greater love and with greater devotion. And now I'm at my house, and so I'm going to stop talking. Grace and peace to you. Amen.